It's time for us to begin. Obviously, Bill Phillips isn't here today, and we're not going to study wherever it was he was studying. So I get the opportunity to teach when he's not here, so I look forward to that opportunity any chance I get. Before we start our class this morning, Jerry, will you lead us in a prayer, please? Amen. Okay. 39 years ago, last night, was the third worst nightclub fire in our history. The Beverly Hills Supper Club. Anyone remember hearing about that? Well, May 28, 1977, I was a volunteer fireman for the Wilder Fire Department. Where's Wilder? That's where I grew up. But Wilder was south of Newport, Kentucky, and east of Covington, Kentucky. If you ever go 75 south to Florida, just as you go into Kentucky from Cincinnati, that's Covington. And I was just across the Licking River in Wilder. That particular evening, I was at the Dixie Gardens Drive-In Theater with a group from the Clifton Church of Christ. I remember seeing and hearing fire squads and all that. And my point is, had I been home on a Saturday night, I would have gone to, not to the supper club as a guest, but I would have been a volunteer fireman, and I would have gone to that fire. Not kids, but I was 19 at the time, members of the fire department that were my age, one of the gentlemen, his name was Dale Cruz. He was there, and he actually helped save someone out of the fire. She, in turn, paid for his college education, and he became a full-time fireman in Highland Heights. But that night, 165 people died, and more than 200 were injured. And I was almost there. Almost, but not. We all know about 9/11. Obviously, what happened to our country on 9/11. One of the stories that I read of a survivor was a gentleman by the name of Joe Lotz. He was 51 years old at the time, and he worked for Compaq Computer Company. And he was based out of Arlington, Virginia. And he and 4 co-workers were having a meeting on 9/11. They were having a meeting at the Windows, and it was at the World Trade Center. And he flew in the day before he was flying in from Dallas, and his flight took 14 hours. It was delayed. He didn't get in until midnight, so he didn't have dinner with his coworkers. So they had breakfast the next morning with his group because Elaine, one of the workers with him, had changed some of the slides in the presentation that he was going to make. So they had breakfast that morning. As he traveled, he had a white shirt and a paisley green shirt. Well, the white shirt that morning was real wrinkled. So he didn't wear his white shirt. He wore his paisley green shirt because the white shirt was too wrinkled. They go to breakfast. They talk. They discuss. They finished breakfast about 8:25 a.m. But before they left, Elaine, a coworker, gave him a gift. And she gave him a tie. And he liked far-out wild ties. I was going to wear one today just as an example, but I don't have any like that. But he actually wore a tie, and it was a Monet, and it was Sunset at Lava Court. So you can imagine what a tie like that looked like. Well, it didn't go well with the paisley green shirt, so he made a decision, just as they were going to the elevator, that he would go put on his white shirt. So he goes back to his room, and he irons his white shirt. Puts on his shirt, puts on his tie. He repacks his suitcase, and then he proceeds to leave. At 8:45 that morning, the first plane hit the North Tower. He was at the elevator to go to the meeting, and he survived. Almost he would have been, had it not been for the shirt, had it not been for the tie, he would have been among those listed as fatalities for 9/11. So if you haven't guessed yet, today's lesson is going to be about almost. Almost doing something. Almost accomplishing something. We have a song in our songbook, number 21, Almost Persuaded. I think most of us know that song, and no, I'm not going to lead it. Nick, you want to lead it? Mike would lead it. But number 21, Almost Persuaded. The gentleman that wrote the song, the night of December the 29th, 1876, marked one of the most tragic wrecks in the history of America Railroad. On that bitter cold night, a westbound express train crashed through a trestle over a swollen stream near Ashtabula, Ohio. It caught fire and carried 100 passengers to a burning death. On board the ill-fated Chicago-bound train was Philip Bliss, beloved and famous gospel song composer and singer born in rural Pennsylvania. Philip Bliss was reared in an adjunct poverty. In his teens, he worked at a country sawmill for $10 a month and attended a singing school conducted by William Bradbury, who greatly encouraged young Bliss. In his early 20s, he married, bought a ramshack buggy and a horse named Fanny, and went about the countryside with his wife teaching music. His average income was $13 a month. At 26, Bliss wrote a secular song he called Vora Vale. He learned his first notes on a handmade flute whittled from a cane. He sent his song to a Chicago firm by the name of Root and Cabby, music producers, with the request that if the composition was acceptable, he would appreciate a real flute in exchange. Reading the manuscript, George Frederick Root sent Bliss the finest flute that he could find, along with a note that a job with the firm at Root and Caddy was waiting him if he wanted to come to Chicago. At 32, Philip Bliss was the director of music at Chicago's first Congregational Church, editor of hymns for Root and Caddy, and composed both words and music for gospel songs. Bliss was very alert for themes. On Sunday night, while waiting for a train in Ohio, Bliss slipped into a church and took a rear seat. The minister, Mr. Brundage, was reading from Acts of the Apostles. Then Agrippa said unto Paul, Almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. During his sermon, Mr. Brundage said, to be almost saved is to be entirely lost. And Philip Bliss had a theme for one of his most famous gospel songs. After spending Christmas with his mother in Pennsylvania, Bliss and his wife were returning to Chicago when that train plunged through the trestle. Bliss, he got out of the burning car, but unable to find his wife, he fought back through the flames, and in a vain effort to save her, he died at her sight. His trunk was savaged, and then it found an unfinished hymn, and it began with, I know not what awaits me, God kindly veils my eyes. So when you think of this song, Almost Persuaded, it was the words from Paul, from Agrippa, and we'll look at that chapter and that lesson here shortly. Yes. No, I didn't. That wasn't planned. So we'll sing it today. But and if you think about those words, almost persuaded, now to believe, almost persuaded, Christ to receive, seems now some soul today, go Spirit, go thy way, some more convenient today, on thee I'll call. And then in that, probably the saddest words that we'll sing or read is sad, sad, that bitter wail, almost but lost. So, Mike Phelps, I think all of us know who he is, the Olympic swimmer. He's the most decorated Olympian. He won 8 gold medals at, I think, the 2008 Olympics. But how many medals does Michael Phelps have? Without Googling, don't put your phones down. How many medals does Mike Phelps have? Gold medals. Can't hear you. Speak a little louder. He has 18. He has 18 gold medals. You know how many silver medals he has? 2. So he won 18 times. He came in first. Twice he came in second. Twice he came in third. So he has 22 medals, 18 are gold, 22 are second place, 2 are third place. Most people don't remember who came in second, do they? We know who came in first. When you watch the Olympics, which are coming up, it's always something to watch how they get to the finish line, especially when it's one of those photo finishes, they call it. Photo finish means that you almost won, but they have to take a picture to see that you were just, and we can't even measure that hundredth of a second that you came in second. But we don't remember second place, it's first place. Imagine being a Christian who comes that short of making it to heaven. Wouldn't that be terrible? To hear God say what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 7, when he says, I never knew you. Depart from me, I never knew you. Because that's the same as being in last place. Now, when it comes to medals, yeah, you get a silver medal, bronze medal. You might get a trophy. Well, today we give everybody trophies, but we won't go there. But as Christians, our mission, our goal is to be first, is to be successful, and to not here almost but lost. In Acts chapter 26, we have the governor Festus, and Festus doesn't seem to have a knowledge of Jesus Christ and Paul. He's just a prisoner that basically inherited. He inherited. And Paul, being a Roman citizen, basically had asked to be put before Caesar. And so Festus was going to allow that. And while he was waiting to get to Caesar, King Agrippa was there, and Bernice, his wife, they were coming through there, and so Festus was telling Agrippa about Paul, and Agrippa wanted to hear Paul. So, but what do we know about Agrippa? Who's his grandfather and father? Can anybody tell me? Yeah. And what did he want to do? What did he try to do? He tried to kill baby Jesus. The Herod that killed all the 2-year-olds, trying to kill that king that was born, that was his grandfather. Who was his father? He's the Herod that beheaded James. So you're Paul, and you're going to go talk to the grandson and the son of someone that tried to kill baby Jesus and then beheaded the Apostle James. But Paul looked forward to the opportunity. So let's turn to Acts chapter 26. In verse 12, basically what we have there is Paul takes the opportunity to preach, and basically where Paul is he's here basically in front of everyone that was invited. I mean, these were high ups. I would say this probably would be comparable today to standing in front of the Congress or Senate. Distinguished people that he's there in front of. And what Paul does is Paul basically presents who he was. And he knew Agrippa. He knew that King Agrippa. Now, Festus didn't know who Jesus was. And even though there were now thousands of Christians, but Agrippa knew who Jesus was. And so Paul basically gives his history. He explains that he persecuted Christians. He talked about that he did it as Saul, that he put Christians to death, that he was involved in that. And then he explains in verse 14, it says, and when all had fallen to the, basically he's verse 12, while thus occupied, as I journeyed to Damascus with authority and commission from the chief priest at midday, O king, along the road I saw the light from heaven, brighter than the sun, shining around me and those who journeyed with me. And when all had fallen to the ground, I heard a voice speaking to me, saying in Hebrew, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. So I said, who are you, Lord? And he said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting, but rise and stand on your feet. For I have appeared to you for this purpose, to make you a minister and a witness both of these things which you have seen and the things which I will yet reveal to you. I will deliver you from the Jewish people as well as from the Gentiles, to whom I now send you, to open their eyes in order to turn them from darkness to light, and from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and an inheritance among those who are sanctified by faith in me. And then we know, after he gives this message to Agrippa, what does Agrippa say? What's the comment that he makes?
He's almost persuaded.
Yeah. You almost persuaded me to be a Christian. Now, we don't know whether Agrippa ever did at that point, but we know that Agrippa had the opportunity, but almost. Almost that persuaded me to be a Christian. So when we look at Agrippa, he was almost convinced to be a Christian, but he failed. There was a history teacher who was teaching a class, and he says to the students, you could take this class two ways, seriously or take it over. As Christians, as humans, I'll put it that way, as humans, we don't get that opportunity to take it over, do we? Once we're done, like Rover, Dead All Over, once we're done, there is no redos. There's no coming back. So as Christians, we have to take it. So as humans, we have to take our lives seriously, and especially as Christians, we have to take our lives seriously. When we make a decision to follow Christ, we have to take that serious and follow it. Any comments at this point? Don?
Revelation, start 15, is talking about the church of Laodicea. I know that thou workest, thou art neither cold nor hot, and I would that thou wert cold or hot. So then, because thou art lukewarm, neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth.
Okay. If you didn't hear that, Don was referring to Revelations chapter 15, where basically the Laodiceans were referenced there, and basically we're talking about lukewarm Christians. And basically it says it's better for you, basically spews you out of his mouth, being a lukewarm Christian. Okay. Other comments? Okay, I don't know what examples that you can think of those who almost, but I have some. In Mark, the 10th chapter, I think we're familiar with the rich young ruler. And in Mark 10, verses 17 through 22. And now, as he was going out on the road, one came running, knelt before him, and asked him, Good teacher, what shall I do that I may inherit eternal life? Jesus said to him, Why do you call me good? No one is good but one, that is God. You know the commandments. Do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not steal, do not bear false witness, do not defraud, honor your father and your mother. And he answered and said unto him, Teacher, all these things I have kept from my youth. Then Jesus looked at him, loved him, and said to him, One thing you lack, go your way, sell whatever you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasures in heaven, and come take up your cross and follow me. But he was sad at this word and went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. So here's a rich young man that was a young Jewish man who basically had followed the law from his youth and knew the law, knew what was right and wrong, and he did those things. But the one thing that Jesus pointed out was his one weakness, and that was his great wealth. He wasn't willing to give that up, not knowing how much longer of life he had. He wasn't willing to give that up to have heaven. So, first question I have for us today is, when Jesus looks at us, what does he say to us that we have to give up? Ned, it's not my riches, because I don't have riches, so I don't. But But Mark says self, have to give up self. The way of life, old way of life, old way of life. Okay, Herschel said anything or any person that stands between us and God. Those things we need to give up. And Jesus says to us, he may not say it like he said to the rich young ruler, but we all know in our minds what he would say to us that we have to give up. You know, if there's a habit that you have that is a sinful habit, maybe it's your job you have to give up because you're so focused on your job that the church goes here. Is that a job to have that could make you spend eternity in hell so that you can have earthly possessions? Is that a job worth having? A career? I mean, it's there are things in our lives that we have to think of, just as this rich young ruler. Jesus knew his heart. He knew he had riches, and he did all the things. And think about how he mentioned all the things that he does. Sometimes I think we look at that and we think, okay, I went to church. Check. I read the Bible. Check. I said my prayers. Check. Okay, I'm good. Now maybe that took 5 minutes or an hour. But we think in our mind, okay, I did enough today. And did we do enough? And that's where we have to ask ourselves, did I do enough? Did I take advantage of opportunities that were laid in front of me? Did I notice those opportunities? Or did I walk away and go the other way, like on the Good Samaritan, the two who basically just went on the other side of the road? They didn't, at least they act like they didn't see, huh? Do we do that sometimes? Act like we don't see something? Nikki?
Because then I'll go, like what you just said is like things that I do. Like I'll go throughout the day. I don't, like the first part there was check, 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 okay, I'm done. But I don't really think like that. I'm talking about me personally. And I'll go throughout the day and where opportunities present themselves, I think, I grasp whatever it may be, helping somebody or saying this, doing something for somebody and saying, I did this because of Jesus or whatever. So, I don't know. Like when you said earlier, I'm not so literal. That's part of my problem. Where you say that you might almost give in. Like I'll see signs and billboards. There's one I pass by all the time in Pennsylvania on the turnpike. It says if you die today, heaven or hell. And I'm pretty sure, without a doubt, it would be heaven. But then when I hear you say something like almost, I don't see how it would be that close. Almost. But I'm sure you probably didn't mean that literally. And I realize I'm babbling, and I'm not really saying what I'm trying to say, but
Well, no,
I don't know if you get what I'm
yeah, I know what you're saying, because we all have to, not struggle, but we all have to keep in mind in our lives how we're living our lives. And like the sign said, if we die today, and there's all kinds of sermons that have been preached about that, but we have to know in our heart that we are right. We have to do what we can do, and that's part of when we reflect on our lives every day, how we live. It's what are we doing? Are we doing enough? And
I do know in my heart that I'm right, but then that makes me think, we've had sermons in here that talk about what people say about their heart and,
but think of this though, Nikki, is think if we go by literally what the Bible says, and we do what the Bible says, which is what we do. Think of those who don't do that, who don't take baptism as a requirement. And so think of all the people who love Jesus, who think they're doing right, but in the end, they're on the wrong path.
I mean, like, I take the Bible very seriously.
We have to.
That's it. I think it's pretty cut and dry, very clear. But I also know that I'm nowhere near doing
Well, I mean, obviously, I think we're all lacking in different areas because we are human. And Satan is powerful, and he knows how to tempt us and distract us. Maybe is a better word, distract us. But I think that when we look at our daily lives, we have to live it to the best, following the example of Christ and the apostles. We have to follow it as best we can. Now, none of us are apostles. We don't live our lives provided by Jesus and just go about and just doing good and assume everything will be taken care of. I mean, we're not testing Jesus that way, God that way. We're living our lives as best we can. I think we need to continue to do that, and I don't think there's an easy answer that's just going to tell you, other than like here where we look at examples, that there are people who think they're right, but they're not. And even though they think they're doing the right things, and they could be good people.
I know I'm doing the right things, I just don't think it's enough sometimes.
Well, I don't know if all of us, we all can probably say that it's not enough all times, that there are times where we've passed opportunities to do something that whatever it is. I mean, it's, we don't have to get into specifics, but there are times where probably all of us have looked at opportunities that we. I only have 2 more pages of notes. We're good.
There are times when opportunities present themselves. Like I'm on jury duty right now, and I'm seeing a lot of people downtown, and I've been saying a lot of things to a lot of different people. Sometimes I'll see an opportunity that will present itself, and I'm almost not embarrassed or shy, but I know, you know how somebody's going to react, and you see all that, and you're like, but you have to make yourself take advantage of this opportunity anyway. And I do all that, but I'm not married. I have to clean my house. I have to go to work. There's only 24 hours in the day. So anyway.
No. Anyway, other comments? Don?
In Matthew 7:21, it says, not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven. So there's a lot of
Yeah, no.
people out there.
Sure.
That claim here, but it's
Yeah.
unless you actually follow what you say,
Yeah.
actually follow.
And that's the one thing about judgment and Christianity is we are all individuals. Just like here, Jesus knew that rich young ruler's heart. He knew his heart. He knows all of our hearts. He knows areas that we are lacking but as Christians, as individuals, we have to just work and keep striving for perfection. Now, we'll never get it, but if we're striving for perfection, we'll be a lot closer to getting there as opposed to if we just say, I don't have a chance, and throw up our hands.
Well, that makes me feel better because I am a perfectionist. Some people call it control freak.
Well, yes.
I think we're dealing with 2 different issues here. Matthew 7:21, those people almost made it, but they never became Christians or servants of God in that sense. It wasn't that they were children of God. Once we become children of God, all right, we're forgiven as long as we do our best. Now, your best, God may expect a whole lot more from them, whatever your circumstance, or he may expect a lot less than you. But he expects
Romans 14:12, real quick. Romans 14:12 says, "So then each of us shall give an account of himself to God." So we are all going to be, Judy?
Yeah, and in regards to that, a smart man or woman, Christian man or woman that evaluates what they are doing on a daily basis. So we have that back in Revelation, where we allow Satan to make us go out saying, and be born, and then we become in that category where it's almost there.
Yeah.
And we can see ourselves, but that's good. We can on a daily basis, going, what could I do?
Yeah.
But still see the grace that's there.
And it's better that we're striving for it as opposed to think, well, I made it.
And I do think about that too, at least I'm aware of it. Like, I don't doubt myself, but just, like, that's why I said don't take it personal. Sometimes y'all make me feel like I'm,
Oh, no, and that's not the intent.
I mean, there's been a couple of sermons, and that's good that Mark Bass is given, and I leave out here like, oh, well, I just, but that's good. That's good, that, you guys make me aware.
Okay. All right. The next example that we'll look at, any other comments first? Okay. Is Lot's wife. We know, I think most of us know the story of Lot, Lot's wife. We don't know her name. We know that Lot was Abraham's nephew, and Abraham's herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen had some disagreements, and so basically Abraham knew that they had to kind of separate. He gave Lot the choice, and Lot chose to go towards Sodom and Gomorrah. He ends up in Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah, we know, is a United States 2016 type place. It's corrupt. It's bad, and God's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And that's an example where we have Abraham negotiates with God and gets it to where if there's just 10, finally when he gets it down to just 10, so God sends angels to Sodom and Gomorrah to bring out Lot and his family, and Lot and his wife and daughters are the only ones who leave. And what does Lot's wife do? What were they commanded not to do? Not to turn back. Not to look back. But what did Lot's wife do? Look back. And even when we look at Jesus in teaching, if we look at Luke, the 17th chapter, verse 32, Jesus says, remember Lot's wife. And it was because Lot's wife looked back. That chapter of Luke 17 is kind of referring to the end of time and when the kingdom and what the people were doing in Noah's day, what they were doing in Lot's day. But then he says, remember Lot's wife. So Lot's wife had escaped the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and was free, but looked back. What lesson can we learn from that today?
Straight ahead while you're on the path.
Keep looking straight ahead. Don't look back.
I think that the bottom line there is once you become a Christian, don't look back at all those things, worldly things that you did. Well, I wish I could do some of those. I had a good time drinking and carrying on like that with my friends, but that's bad news.
Bad news. That's bad news, says the elder. That's bad news, looking back. Yes. Sorry? Right. If we do that, we're not worthy of the kingdom. So when we think of Lot's wife, she almost survived Sodom and Gomorrah. Even though she left, did she really leave? And we don't know anything about Lot's wife, what she did, what she was involved with there.
Well, she didn't want to leave anyway. She kind of had a big mouth.
So we know she had a big mouth, but she left. But did she really leave? And I guess that's the question. So sometimes we look at humans who become Christians. Do they really become Christians just because they got baptized? And when we can look at, and this isn't part of my class, so I'm just jumping there, but we can look at the parable of the tares, the sower, and one of those is examples of those who sprout out quick, but then they just die off because they don't have the base. So sometimes as Christians, as people who become Christians, they do it maybe to please somebody, but do they really get the roots? Are they really grounded? And then they turn back. They turn back to the world. And Alkire Road and many other churches can look at their roll of members who have looked back. They've gone back.
And there's another example where a man puts his hand to the plow, looks back, he doesn't plow a straight furrow, he gets off the path. So always look forward and you go straight.
Yeah. If you see an Amish field that's been plowed, I mean, it's pretty impressive. I drive a lot, so you can see them from the freeway that those squares and lines are pretty straight, and they do it with that. But imagine looking back what it would be like. If I tried to control it, that's what it would look like.
You ever cut your grass and just look back for 1 second and
Yep. Yep. Pick a point. Yep, exactly. Pick a point. Pick a point and focus on it, and what we have to focus on is heaven. That's what as long as we keep our eyes towards heaven and working towards heaven, we should be good. It's when we look back, that's when we fall. Another example is Moses. And again, not to go through the whole children of Israel and what Moses did, but we know that Moses led the children out of Israel, children of Israel out of Egypt, and were they a peaceful, easy-working group? No. And because of that caused Moses to not be able to do what? He got this close, but he wasn't able to what? Go into the promised land. But he can go up on the mountain and see it. And he even says to God, he says, "Let me, I pray, cross over and see the fair land that is beyond the Jordan, that the good hill country in Lebanon." But the Lord was angry with me on your account and would not listen to me. And the Lord said to me, "Enough, speak to me no more of this matter." That's Deuteronomy chapter 3, 25 through 26. So we look at God as our Father, right? At what point do we as parents finally say, "That's enough, drop it, we're not doing it"? And that's kind of what you have here with Moses, because Moses wanted to see the promised land. He wanted that, but why wasn't he able to do it? He messed up, 50 times? Don't we have examples of him just messing up 50 times, 100 times? How many times? What? Just one time? One time only?
didn't he lie about saying that he did something that God did, like turn that stick into a snake? I thought that's like
No, what did he do? He struck. He was told to speak to the rock for water to come out, but he struck the rock. So, now, did God say, "Don't do that"? No. What did God say? Speak to the rock. Did he speak to it? He probably did, but he added to it. Herschel? Yeah. So Moses was that close. I mean, he almost made it to the promised land. But that doesn't mean he didn't make it to heaven, but to Canaan land, where he had been driving, for lack of a better term, the Israelites through the wilderness to get to the promised land, but he didn't make it. He almost, but he didn't make it. And so when we look at that, also we can look at Acts the 5th chapter. We have an example of, in Acts 2, we have the church starts, the church began. We have a number of Christians who are there, and they're staying there. And a lot of Christians that are there then, like we have Barnabas, sold a lot, and he gave the money. But we have a couple, Ananias and Sapphira. Now what did they do? Yeah, they sold land too. They sold property. And they gave. Did they give, right? What did they do? They lied about it. You know, nobody said, and nobody said that they had to give all. Nobody said that. But they acted like they did, right? They plotted. So they almost did good, but they didn't, because they lied about it. They didn't do it with the right frame. It was theirs to do with what they pleased. They did, but why would they have lied about it? Exactly. They wanted the praise of men. They wanted the praise of men. And it cost them their lives. So they had good intentions, right? They had good intentions. I mean, they sold land. They didn't have to do that to help other Christians, but then they lied about it so that they could be glorified, not God. And again, when we look at all the religious worlds today, all those people who love Jesus, one of the things as preparing for this that I saw, won't spend a lot of time on it, but I thought was pretty interesting, is when you think about the world we live in today, does the world know Jesus? But they do, because what do they celebrate on December 25th every year? And they say, he's the reason for the season. Don't they say that? Now we know it's not right, but the world knows Jesus. They celebrate his birthday. That's how wrong they are, but they do know Jesus. They know him as a man. They may not know the right, but they know who Jesus is. Don?
A while ago, that was my point. That wasn't necessarily Christians, the Church of Christ, but the world in general.
Religious world. Yes.
They're saying,
Yeah, in Matthew 7.
whatever.
Yeah.
But they're, they got women preachers,
Right.
counselors,
Right.
but they're proclaiming,
Yeah.
yes.
Exactly. No, they're close. They No. I think we knew Matthew 7 was referring to not the church, and not that all Christians are going to be saved. They're going to fall short, but there are many who call them who have a religious, but they're wrong. We can look at in Matthew chapter 25. We have the parable of the 10 virgins. There were 10 virgins there for a wedding. Oh, I thought somebody was speaking to me. It was saying we're under attack. That's why I listen for. But in Matthew, the 25th chapter, we have the 10 virgins. And there we have 5 foolish virgins and 5 wise virgins. Why do we say 5 foolish? They weren't prepared. They didn't have the preparations. They were there. They were there waiting for the bridegroom, but they didn't make preparations. They've fallen asleep. When they wake up, go to trim their lamps. There's no oil. They ask for oil from the 5 that have it, and they refuse it. So while they leave to go get oil, the bridegroom comes, and then they can't enter in. The same way, they were that close, but because they weren't prepared, they didn't get in. So, think of the millions that are going to be, in their mind, close, but second place, third place, fifth place, they don't remember. And we want to be in first place. We want to be, when we reach judgment, we hear, enter in. Well done, my good and faithful servant. That's what we want to hear. We don't want to hear, depart from me, I never knew you. And again, when we think of our lives that we live, and as Nikki talked and as we've talked, we live our life every day to do the best we can. That's all that we can do is take what we have, the talents that we have, the abilities that we have, and do our best, knowing what Christ expects of us. That's what we need to do, to live our lives so that we aren't almost, but lost. Comments? Saved by the bell.